Well, if you are joining us this week for the first time, or if you need a refresher from last week, if you recall, we are in the middle of a series that explores the way in which gifts are received. We're looking at, in Scripture, the way that different people received the greatest gift ever given to mankind, Jesus Christ himself. And so each week, we are taking a gift and we are opening it, and that gift represents a particular attitude that sometimes we either should have or one that unfortunately we have that we shouldn't as it relates to receiving Jesus at Christmas. And it's my hope that as we are going through this series, that it will kind of help us to realign our perspective, realign our priorities, and help us to kind of examine our own hearts and asking ourselves, how have I received Christmas? How have I received Jesus this time of year? Am I receiving him the way that I should, or am I allowing all of these other things that I have going on? And let's face it, there's a lot of them to kind of get in the way of what God wants to do in my life during this time of year. And so we're going to go ahead and jump right into the next gift. Last week we had a ring that we opened up, and we talked about humility and receiving Jesus in humility. And we receive him in humility because of two key factors. One of them being who he is in light of that, who we are. And because of those two things, we can't help but be humbled by the fact that God would choose to do what he did by sending Jesus for us. And so let's go ahead and open this week's gift and see what it is that we can learn about the way that we receive Jesus. And so here we have it, a Bible. Now that seems pretty appropriate as we are here at church this morning, that we would have a Bible as a gift. But this isn't just any Bible. This is actually one of my Bibles. Has my name printed on it here. And this isn't just one of my Bibles. This was actually the first Bible that I was ever given. Believe it or not, I was given it on a Christmas. If you look inside of this Bible, the date that I received it was December 25th, 1998, which was kind of a strange gift for me to receive in 1998. In 1998, at Christmas time, I was in 7th grade. Okay? And my family did not go to church. I shared with you in the past that as a young child, we went some, but then after my parents had divorced, we quit going. And so we weren't church-going family. The idea of God was always there. I feel as a young child, I always was inquisitive about whether there was a God, what he was like, what it might be like to go to heaven someday. But as far as having any kind of spiritual upbringing or roots in my life, I didn't have any. And so there I was in 7th grade receiving a Bible as a Christmas gift. And I appreciated the gesture. I did. But I'll be honest with you, it didn't really have a whole lot of value to me because it didn't mean anything to my life. It was a nice gift. My name's printed on it. There's a nice little message in there for me. But as far as being a gift that I can say that I honestly, when I opened it, saw the immediate value in it, that wasn't the case. It wasn't something that I got overly excited about. It wasn't one of those things that I had hoped all Christmas season that this would be the thing that I got for Christmas. It wasn't like that, but yet this was one of the gifts that I received. And I took it and I appreciated it and I kept it on my nightstand next to my bed because it was a nice gesture, but it meant very little. Until 4 years later. For those of you that know my story or my testimony, 4 years later, it was around Easter time, and I was going through a lot of different things in my life at this point. For years, I had struggled with depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder. I had bouts of anxiety. I was a brat. I was a little punk. I had all kinds of behavioral problems that I was dealing with. In fact, I was seeing a counselor at least once a week. I was in anger management. At this point in my life, my mom and I fought just about on a daily basis over any and everything. If there was something that I could say to set her off, I would say it. I was mouthy. I was disrespectful. I was dealing with a lot of stuff in here and in here. And I got to the point in my life where I was always pretty good in school, but my grades were starting to slip, not because I didn't understand things, I just didn't care anymore. So I quit doing my homework, I quit studying, I quit trying on tests. And so my grades, for the first time, I'd always been an A student, I got a D in my Spanish 3 class, I remember. First D I ever got. And my grades began to slip. And then I started to make friends with people that really were starting to lead me down the wrong road. I started to get in trouble, not in little things, but bigger things. In fact, I remember one time having the state police involved with me and some friends broke into a school. And my mom had to go to the school and talk to the administrator. And fortunately, I didn't get in a whole lot of trouble for that. But things were starting to spiral. They were at the beginning of a very bad path that I could have taken. And I've shared some of that with you before. Some of you, this is the first time you've heard this. But I began to experience a lot of negative influence in my life, and I began to go down a path that really wasn't good. But then 4 years after receiving this Bible, in the midst of all of that, something changed for me. In the spring of 2002, it was around Easter, as I said, and ABC, the channel ABC, had produced a made-for-TV movie simply titled Jesus. Okay? Now, I watched this movie, and what compelled me to watch this movie, I don't know. But I did. I watched this film, and looking back on it, I can say that, like most movies, they did not paint the most biblical picture of Jesus, but most movies don't show the most accurate biblical picture. But nevertheless, it was one of the first exposures that I had to the gospel, at least as far as I could have understood it. Because even as a young child in church, it didn't really resonate. In fact, I was taught by my Sunday school leader that to get to heaven, you just had to do more good than bad. That was what I was taught in Sunday school. And so I'm watching this movie titled Jesus, and I'm hearing these words that Jesus is using about love and forgiveness and acceptance and these things that I had never really heard about God before. Because my concept of God was that if He's real, He's simply watching my life, and I better hope that I do more good than I do bad. And I'm seeing this whole different version of Jesus in this movie. That it was about redemption and grace and love and forgiveness. Things I'd never heard of before. Things that I desperately, whether I realized it at the time or not, were craving in my heart. And at the end of the movie, Jesus is giving the Great Commission. And I realized that now, looking back, that the commission that He was given was to the disciples, and it was all about going out and making more disciples. Right? I know that now. But at the time, the thing that Jesus said that stuck out in my mind that day was at the very end of the Great Commission, He says, "And I will be with you always, even until the end of this age." And I didn't know what any of the other stuff meant, but this idea that Jesus was telling them that He would be with them always. With them always. And something, it just hit me. I was overwhelmed with emotion. And I thought to myself, I need Jesus. I want Jesus to be with me always. And so I went up to my bedroom, and I sat in my room, and I began to talk to God. I didn't know how to pray. Here I was, this 16-year-old punk kid. I'm bawling my eyes out. And I look over at my nightstand, and guess what's sitting there? This Bible. And so I grabbed this Bible, and I didn't know anything about it. And I remember clinging on to it. 16 years old. Thought I was a tough guy. And I'm hugging this Bible, this one right here. Bawling my eyes out. Asking God to forgive me. Asking Jesus to forgive me. I remember saying something in my prayers along the lines of, "Jesus, I don't know how to be better. I don't know how to do things right, but I know that You do, and I'm asking You to show me." I didn't have somebody preach a sermon. I didn't hear a gospel presentation. I didn't even have a friend who was a Christian sit down with me and share their faith. I watched a movie on ABC, and God used that movie to bring me to Him. And I remember this Bible in that moment, because 4 years earlier, this Bible meant very little to me. But all of a sudden, as I was clenching onto that Bible, and I know now that Bible didn't have any special power, but to me, in that moment, it was a connection point between me and God. It was something I could hold on to. And for the first time, this thing held more value than anything I had ever been given before. And little did I know that that was the start of a journey where the things within this book would mean more to me than anything I could ever possibly be given. I never dreamed in a million years that what I would read and hear would begin to change my life and transform me and eventually lead me down all the paths and making the decisions I did where I would be your pastor today. But God used this Bible 4 years after I got it to speak into my life and to change it dramatically. But at the time, I didn't realize just how valuable it would be. In fact, inside of here, there's a little message that was written. I'll just read part of it. It says, "There is a tremendous amount of wisdom written in this book. Anyone who reads it should have no doubts about God's plan for us and what Jesus would do in any situation." When I read that, it still at the time made no sense to me. But when I read it again, then I knew that God was with me and that He was going to guide me. And so as we're talking this morning about receiving gifts, my question for you is, have you ever received something that at the time you didn't see the value in it? Even though it may have been very valuable, in the moment that you received it, it didn't hold a special place in your heart. It didn't appear to have much value, but only later on did you see just how valuable that thing is. Because, we live life moving forward while looking backward, don't we? When we are making decisions and going through life and doing different things, we're always moving forward. We're always looking ahead, but we're often learning by looking back. Because we don't learn from our decisions that we haven't made yet. We learn from those decisions after the fact, don't we? What do they say? Hindsight is 20/20, right? So if you ever received something that at the moment you appreciated it, but it was only after the fact that you look back and you say, yeah, that really had tremendous value for me. I wish I would have appreciated it more when I first received it. In the Gospel of Luke, there's a component to the Christmas story that kind of illustrates this really well. The Jewish people were waiting for their rescuer. If you know much about the history of the Jewish people and what Christmas is and why Jesus came, but the Jewish people were waiting for a rescuer. They were holding out for a redeemer, for the anointed one, the Messiah, the one that the prophets had prophesied would come one day and deliver them. But what they didn't expect was that the Messiah would come the way that He did, or that He would do things the way that He did them. And so about 2,000 years ago, we cut to our Christmas story, and we have a young Mary who is pregnant with the Son of God. And we have her husband-to-be, Joseph, and they're trying to make this work and trying to figure out how this is going to look, that she is going to have a baby that is not his, but who is going to be the rescuer of the world, the Messiah, the promised one of Israel. And so back then, we didn't have hospitals. When you were going to have a baby, you didn't get in your car and drive to the hospital to have your baby with all these nurses and doctors and professionals who are trained to deliver babies and monitor babies and make sure everything is healthy and good for the mom and the baby. We didn't have any of that. People delivered their babies in their homes. The problem for Mary and Joseph was that when she went into labor, she wasn't anywhere near her home. If you remember the story, that Joseph and Mary were on a road trip. They had to leave their home because of a decree that had been given by the Emperor of Rome to take part in the census, right? We have a census going on this year in 2020 where they come to us and we fill out the paper. Back then, you had to go to where your ancestors' family was from. In fact, I'll read it to you in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. This is what happened to Mary and Joseph. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for this census. And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, who was engaged whom he was engaged, who was now expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. You've all heard this many times before. The story of the birth of Jesus being born in a manger. As Mary in labor, her and her husband searching frantically, I'm sure. I can only imagine Joseph. I don't know if men have changed in the last 2,000 years, but I can imagine he's probably pretty nervous. He's probably pretty excited. He doesn't know what to do. She's probably telling him what he needs to do because he can't even think straight. And they're going around trying to find a place to take Mary so that she can have this baby because they're not home. And so they're going to these inns and they're trying to find a place that they can get out of the cold and out of the elements so they can go inside and she can deliver this baby. And everywhere they go, they get no occupancy, full. Sorry, there's nowhere to stay. They're probably going to people's individual homes and just asking, can we just stay in your home and deliver this baby? Sorry, there's no room. Because remember, there are thousands of people who are in Bethlehem that normally aren't there for this census. And so they're going to all these places, and the Bible tells us there was no lodging, there was no room. You've heard it said there was no room in the inn for them. And so despite their best efforts, they kept getting turned away and turned away and turned away until eventually she goes and gives birth. Whether it was in a cave or in a stable, we don't know for sure. But we do know that it was in a place where there were animals, and we know that Jesus was laid into a manger or a feeding trough upon his birth. That was the way the King of the universe chose to enter into this creation. But do you think the innkeepers, those who were letting people stay in their homes, do you think that if they knew for a second whose child Mary was carrying, that they would have turned her away? Probably not. Because keep in mind, this was ingrained in the Jewish culture, in the Jewish mind, that the Messiah, the promised one, he's going to save us, he's going to rescue us. If they would have known, if the man opened the door and saw Mary and Joseph and they knew that Mary was carrying the Messiah, would they have said, I'm sorry, but there's no room? Probably not. I don't think they would. But why did they? Because they did not see or know what Mary and Joseph saw and knew. They did not see the value in helping this couple out. Because to them, they were just like every other couple. They failed to see the value in the gift that was right in front of them. But there was someone else in this story. Someone who, unlike those whose homes they went to try to find lodging, there was someone in this story who did get it. Who did see the value in who Christ was and who Jesus was. It was the fulfillment of a promise. You see, shortly after Jesus was born, and this is a part of the Christmas story that we don't often talk about, but shortly after Jesus was born, his parents, being faithful Jewish parents, had to take Jesus somewhere. They had to take him to the temple in Jerusalem because Jesus was the firstborn son within this family. And according to the law of Moses, he had to be dedicated to the Lord. And so the Bible tells us that after 8 days, he was circumcised in accordance with the law. And then shortly after that, we don't know exactly how long, the scripture doesn't tell us, but shortly after that, they traveled to Jerusalem, to the temple, to have Jesus dedicated to the Lord, as required by Moses' law. And this is what happens when we're there, shortly after Jesus is born. It says in Luke chapter 2, 25 through 32, and at that time there was a man in Jerusalem named Simeon. He was righteous and devout and was eagerly waiting the Messiah to come and rescue Israel. Like I said, this is what everyone in the culture would have been waiting for. The Holy Spirit was upon him, verse 26 says, and had revealed to him that he would not die until he had seen the Lord's Messiah. That day the Spirit led him to the temple. So when Mary and Joseph came to present the baby Jesus to the Lord as the law required, Simeon was there. He took the child in his arms and praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace, as you have promised. I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He is the light to reveal God to the nations, and he is the glory of your people Israel. Most people at Christmas time, if you mention this character, they will not know who you're talking about, because he's not talked about when it comes to the Christmas narrative. We talk about the shepherds, and we talk about the innkeeper in the manger. We talk about the wise men, the kings, right? The magi. The magi weren't there when Jesus was born. They came, it could have been months later when they appear. But just a short period after Jesus' birth, we have this account of this man named Simeon. Someone whose name is not talked about, who most people do not know who he is. But I believe he's an important figure in this Christmas story because he is one of the few people who understood the value in this child, who understood who Jesus was. I want you to imagine for a moment, if you could think about your life. And I realize that we're all at different stages of life. Some of us are younger, some of us are older. But I want you to think for a second, if you can imagine, if there was one thing in your life, whether it's something you want to experience, something you want to see, if there's one thing in your life that you feel like if you could experience or see that or go through that, then at the end of that, you will feel like you have lived a full life, that your life's vision has been fulfilled, that your life's goal has been fulfilled, and that if God were to take you and you were to die after that moment, you would be content because you experienced whatever that thing is. And I don't know what that is for you. And maybe you've never even thought about that before. All right? But to Simeon, this was that moment. To Simeon, it was this idea that if I could just lay eyes on him, then God, take me. Because my life will have been fulfilled. Everything that I have worked towards, everything that I have longed for will be met in just taking a glimpse at this child. And that was Simeon's response. After seeing Jesus, seeing the value in who he was and who he would be, he tells God, I can now die in peace because I have seen I've seen the salvation of Israel. That was how valuable Jesus was to this man. He saw Jesus for who Jesus was. He wasn't just another baby. He was the fulfillment of thousands of years of prophecy. He was the fulfillment of all of the promises that every child, young Jewish child, had been told by their parents growing up. One day, you'll be rescued. One day we will be redeemed. One day a hero will rise up among us. And he saw it with his own eyes. He saw the greatest Christmas gift that could ever be given. The first Christmas gift that ever was given. Simeon saw it and he understood its value. But unlike Simeon, most never gave it a second thought that this child had been born. And if it was easy for people then to miss this, if it was easy for people living their lives to miss the value here, then I believe that it's even more so the case for us today. More and more our culture is shifting to a self-centered, pleasure-seeking, materialistic society. That is where we are going. We've always been that way, but we're seeing more and more of it. When you can receive gratification simply by looking at a screen, when you want to buy something, you click buy now and it shows up at your door in 1 or 2 days. When you want someone to compliment you, you post a fabricated picture of yourself online and then you get all the likes and all the comments. We want that instant gratification, and teenagers today are surrounded by this instant need for gratification. It's only getting worse. That is the world that we live in. We are so consumed with self that it's very easy to lose sight of what's truly valuable at Christmas. It's really a sad commentary on society when Christmas is considered the most stressful time of year. A time of year that should be about peace, a time of year that should be about redemption, a time of peace that should remind us of how fortunate we are that God would choose to show us grace rather than condemnation, that God would choose to show us forgiveness rather than judgment. It should be the greatest time of the year for us. But yet it's marked with stress and anxiety. Christmas has become something that feeds the senses. It's all about the abundance of it all. And unfortunately, many within the church have even adopted a lot of these same mentalities. Christmas has become the opposite of what it should be. And it has happened because, like the innkeepers who had no room for Jesus, I believe that we fail to see what's truly valuable this time of year. We fail to see what truly matters. We fail to see Jesus as the most precious, greatest gift ever given to mankind. Because we are so distracted by all these other things that are going on that we don't, not that we reject Jesus, not that we don't think he's important or that we don't love him, we don't value him, but is he the most valuable thing? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves. Is he the most valuable thing? For some, your memories of Christmas as a child aren't all that great. Perhaps Christmas for you was not a joyous time. Rather than receiving gifts and spending time with family, you received ridicule and judgment and insults. Christmas was a hurtful time for you. Perhaps it's a time that reminds you of a loved one that you have lost, a relationship that ended too soon, a mistake you made that you wish you could go back and do over again. But for many, Christmas is not this perfect time. And so what we do oftentimes because of that, because in our past it is not something that we look at with joy and expectation, we overcompensate, don't we? We want to create the illusion of a perfect Christmas, right? We want to make sure that if we didn't have it, that our kids will have it, right? We overcompensate. We create unrealistic expectations that, let's face it, friends, we're never going to meet them. And what happens when our unrealistic expectations aren't met? We get discouraged. We get depressed. And then it makes us not want to celebrate Christmas all the more. We spend ourselves into debt thinking that I've got to give people these things, that they will only know that I love them if I spend this much on them. I'm going to give them what I could never get. They're going to feel what I never got to feel growing up. And so we all overcompensate to meet this deep-seated need that we think these things are going to fill. But the reality is only Jesus can fill those needs. For others, maybe you fall and prey to the trap of believing that the world's idea of Christmas is what Christmas is all about. You didn't do it intentionally. You didn't do it on purpose. Maybe it was a slow process that drug you into that, or maybe you've never come out of that since coming to know Christ. But the world's idea of Christmas is the same as yours. It's all about who has the most presents under the tree, who has the grandest meal, who spent the most money, who looks the best, whose pictures are the most perfect, who has the best stories to tell. For some, it's all about sleeping in tents and parking lots to try to get the latest and greatest tech or gift, to try to save $20 or $50. People will stampede over each other to try to save some money. And there's nothing wrong with buying gifts. I buy gifts. I like to receive gifts. There's nothing wrong with buying gifts. There's nothing wrong with having a nice meal. I look forward to the meal. It's probably my favorite thing about the traditions that we have is eating that Christmas meal. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. They're good things. But my question is, where are we placing the most value this year at Christmas? If I'm willing to get up at 3 a.m. for Black Friday to go shopping, but yet I can't be inconvenienced, or I can't find an hour in my schedule to come to church on Christmas Eve. I know that sounds harsh, but we have to ask ourselves, what do we value most? If I can make myself uncomfortable and miserable to try to save some money, but yet I don't want to have awkward conversations with my family about why I have to leave early or why I have to come late because I'm taking my family to church on Christmas Eve. If that's more difficult or more uncomfortable for us, then my question is, where are we placing our value? Some will say, but Pastor, you don't understand my family. You don't know how difficult it is. You don't know what their expectations are of me. You're right. I don't know your family. I don't know what their expectations are of you. But what I do know is that Christmas, first and foremost, isn't about your family. And it isn't about my family. So we have this idea that Christmas is all about family, and it's not. Family's part of it, for sure. But Christmas, first and foremost, is about Jesus. It's not about our family. And we've got to get this idea in our mind that of what Christmas is really about, what we should be valuing most. And again, value time with your family. Value those traditions. They're good things, but they're not the most important thing. Jesus is. And we've got to ask ourselves, On the list of things that I value this time of year, where does Jesus rank? Is he number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? Or does he encompass all of it? Because I don't think it should be Jesus, family. No, I think all of these things that we have, Jesus should encompass all of them. That is where we're supposed to place our value. I realize that any time we talk about this and we talk about looking at our traditions versus the things that we're being told we should do versus the things we want to do, it can create stress and anxiety because we don't want to offend people. We want to make people happy. We want to have a peaceful time of year, and I get all of that. And so I just want to close this morning with reading the words of Paul. I want to look at what Paul said, considering all of these things that he could think about in this life, comparing them to knowing Christ. I want you to see what he says in Philippians 3:8. He says, yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have discarded everything else, counting it all as garbage, so that I could gain Christ. That was the attitude of Paul. He said, comparing everything in this life to the value, we're talking about value now, the value of knowing Jesus. Keep in mind, he did not say that everything in life was garbage. He said that when you compare everything else in life to the value of knowing Jesus, it is as if it is worthless. It's not saying that your family is worthless or your traditions are worthless. He's saying when you compare them to the value of Christ, they appear as though they are worthless. That is how less valuable they are to knowing Jesus. And he considers them garbage so that he could gain Christ. So I encourage you this Christmas to consider the way in which you received the gift of Jesus this year. The way in which you approach Jesus this year. As we celebrate his birth, knowing that it ultimately pointed to his death and resurrection, I ask you this Christmas to think about how you value him. Let us not be like the innkeeper who failed to see his value, but be like Simeon, the man who, when seeing that little baby, believed that he had seen everything he needed to in this life and was ready to die because he saw the promised one of Israel. He saw Jesus, and that was more valuable than anything in his life. Can you and I say the same thing? Can we say the same thing?